Ever get that feeling that, the way things are run just isn't quite clicking? Like your voice gets lost in the noise, or maybe the big decisions don't really reflect what matters to you.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. It's pretty common.
Right. And there's just so much information flying around trying to figure out how to make things better can feel, well, kind of overwhelming.
Totally. Information overload is real.
So today, we're trying to cut through some of that noise. We're doing a deep dive into some really innovative ideas about how we could maybe rethink democracy, make it more inclusive, more responsive.
That's right. And for you listening in, especially if you're looking for knowledge that really clicks, gives you those aha moments without feeling buried, this is definitely for you. We've dug into a fascinating range of possibilities, everything from cutting edge tech AI, blockchain, to looking back at older governance ideas, even thinking about future generations.
Exactly. And our mission here isn't just to, skim the surface.
Right.
We want to pull out the most compelling, maybe the most thought-provoking nuggets. Ideas that suggest a future where democracy is more than just voting every few years. It's like a living connection.
A living connection, I like that, yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it. What are some of the core frustrations that keep bubbling up about our current democratic systems? Where are the sticking points?
Well, looking across the different sources we explored, some really consistent themes emerge, big limitations people see.
Okay.
One major one is this idea of sort of passive versus active citizenship.
Yeah.
Right now, for many people, it's mostly just voting now and then.
Right, periodically.
Exactly. But what about ongoing involvement, real engagement? Then there's the big challenge of making sure marginalized voices are actually heard. People whose perspectives get missed because of socioeconomic status, identity, ability, things like that.
That's a huge one.
It really is. And there's also a lot of concern about short-term thinking and policymaking. Decisions focused on the next election cycle, not the long haul. Plus, a lack of real deep discussion deliberation, which often gets drowned out by misinformation. And sometimes the institutions themselves just feel distant, inaccessible.
Yeah, disconnected.
Disconnected, exactly. And that ties into the last point, really this feeling of a gap between local issues, what we see in our own communities, and these massive global challenges.
Wow, okay. That's quite a list of challenges. It feels pretty significant.
It is.
So if that's the problem space, where do we even start to imagine something, well, better? Our sources throw up some really interesting ideas for making participation more inclusive.
They really did. Lots of innovative thinking out there.
Let's start with this one. Deliberative democracy at scale. That sounds ambitious. What's the core idea?
It's really about shifting the focus, moving beyond just casting a vote to actually creating spaces where people can have informed discussions that directly influence policy.
Okay, like actual conversations.
Exactly. Citizens' assemblies are probably the best known example. Think about Ireland, right? They use them for really tough issues like abortion and climate change.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that.
And Germany uses something called planning cells. The key thing is you get a group of people randomly selected.
Randomly. So not just the usual suspects.
Precisely. That's crucial. They often use something called stratified sampling to make sure the group mirrors the general population, age, gender, location, all that.
Okay. A mini public, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And these people, they get briefed by experts. They discuss things in small groups. There's facilitation to help them find common ground. It's a structured process.
So they really dig into the issues.
They do. And the idea is they move beyond just gut reactions to develop informed recommendations. And because the process is seen as fair and representative, those recommendations carry real weight.
Right. It gives them legitimacy.
Exactly. The Irish examples led to major policy changes. And now some people are thinking even bigger, like AI-facilitated mega deliberative assemblies.
Whoa, okay. Mega. What does that mean?
Thousands of citizens, maybe even more. And using artificial intelligence to help manage the process, ensuring balanced information gets out, maybe even helping to synthesize all the input and spot potential areas of consensus.
Wow. That's scaling up deliberation in a big way, using AI to help. Interesting. Okay, another area that came up a lot was expanding direct citizen power, going beyond just electing representatives.
Yeah, this is about giving people more direct say in actual decisions, not just who makes them, but what the decisions are.
Like what?
Participatory budgeting is a great example. Probably the most famous case is Porto Alegre in Brazil. Citizens there directly decided how to spend part of the city's budget. which projects get funded,
So people get to vote on where the money goes in their neighborhood.
Essentially, yes. And we see it elsewhere too, like youth participatory budgeting initiatives in New York City. The key takeaway is that giving people direct control over public funds can really empower communities, especially marginalized ones, and build more trust.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes it much more tangible, doesn't it?
Definitely. You're not just voting for the person controlling the money. You're voting on the money.
Right. And what about these continuous participation platforms? You mentioned digital tools.
Yeah, this taps into how technology can move us beyond just these one-off engagement moments like elections.
Okay.
Imagine online platforms where citizens can actually propose their own ideas, debate the details, suggest changes to other proposals, and even vote on specific issues continuously throughout the year.
So democracy is an ongoing conversation enabled by tech.
Kind of, yeah. Places like Barcelona have platforms like Decidim that are trying to do this. It makes participation less of a chore you do every few years and more an ongoing opportunity for those who, want to be involved.
Okay, now this next one sounds really intriguing. Liquid democracy. I've heard the term, but what's the core concept?
Yeah.
Liquid democracy tries to find a sweet spot, sort of, between pure direct democracy, everyone votes on everything, which is impractical and representative democracy, where we just delegate everything.
Okay, a middle ground.
Exactly. The core idea is flexibility. You can vote directly on issues you really care about, where you feel informed.
Right.
But for other stuff, maybe things you don't have time to research or aren't your area of expertise, you can delegate your vote to someone else, someone you trust on that specific topic.
Delegate your vote, like proxy voting.
Similar, but more dynamic. And here's the key part: the instant recall. If the person you delegated to starts voting in ways you don't agree with,
You can take your vote back instantly.
Or delegate it to someone else. It keeps the delegates really accountable. Estonia's e-governance system has elements that hint at this kind of flexibility, but full liquid democracy is still mostly theoretical.
So like choosing your expert representative for each issue, almost, and firing them if needed.
Yeah, something like that. It definitely puts more power back in the hands of the individual voter.
Okay, that's fascinating. Then there was this idea of weighted voting systems. Now, that sounds like it could be controversial.
It definitely can be, and it needs careful thought. The basic idea is that for certain specific policies, the votes of those most directly impacted might count for a bit more.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about, say, environmental regulations for a specific industrial area. The argument is that the votes of the people living right there, breathing that air, might be given slightly more weight than the votes of people living far away.
Okay, I see the logic, but how do you decide who is most impacted? That seems tricky.
It's incredibly tricky. The goal isn't to disenfranchise anyone, but to acknowledge that some decisions have disproportionate impacts. Designing it fairly, avoiding manipulation, ensuring it doesn't just entrench existing power imbalances. Those are huge challenges. But it's an idea being discussed to address that feeling of decisions being made by people who don't have skin in the game, so to speak.
Right, a very delicate balance.
Right.
Okay, moving on a bit. Let's talk about who actually gets to be in the room making decisions. Rethinking representation itself. What sorts of ideas came up there?
Yeah, this connects back to ensuring diverse voices are heard, but it goes deeper into how we select representatives in the first place. Proportional representation often comes up, instead of winner takes all in a district.
Where one person gets elected and everyone who voted differently gets no representation for that seat.
Exactly. Proportional systems try to allocate seats based on the percentage of votes different parties or groups get overall. So smaller parties, minority viewpoints, have a better chance of getting representation in the legislature.
Makes sense. More diverse viewpoints in the room.
Potentially, yes. Then there's a more direct approach of reserving seats specifically for underrepresented groups. This is about actively correcting historical exclusion.
Right. And we mentioned sortition random selection earlier with citizens' assemblies, but some ideas take it further.
They do. While assemblies are often advisory, some proposals suggest using sortition for actual positions of power. Maybe oversight committees, maybe even some legislative roles, though that's more radical.
Wow. Replacing elected politicians with randomly selected citizens.
Well, maybe not replacing entirely, but complementing them. The idea is it could break the hold of career politicians, maybe lead to bodies that look more like the population they serve, what they call descriptive representation.
Interesting.
And tied to that is the idea of rotating leadership. randomly assigning leadership roles for fixed terms to stop power concentrating too much in one place or with one group.
These are some pretty fundamental shifts being proposed, really challenging the way we usually think about political power.
Absolutely. It's about questioning assumptions we've held for a long time.
Now, one really big challenge, and you touched on this earlier, is short-term thinking. How do these ideas address the future, thinking beyond the next election?
That's a crucial point. How do we represent the interests of those not yet born, or the long-term health of the planet? This brings us to temporal democracy.
Temporal democracy, okay.
Ideas like creating future councils. These would be bodies specifically tasked with advocating for long-term interests, thinking decades, even centuries ahead.
Like a voice for the future.
Exactly, and it's not just theoretical. Wales actually has a Future Generations Commissioner.
Oh, really? With actual power?
With legal standing, yes. Their job is to assess how policies impact future generations. There are also proposals for representatives with much longer terms, specifically to focus on long-term issues, insulated from the immediate pressures of election cycles.
That makes sense.
And even dedicated guardians for future generations and the natural world institutions whose whole mandate is protecting these long-term interests.
So building an accountability not just to us now, but to those who come after us. And you mentioned the natural world. It's not just about future people, is it?
No, absolutely not. This idea of intergenerational and interspecies representation is gaining ground. It acknowledges our decisions' impact way beyond the current human population.
Interspecies, how did that work?
Well, it could mean things like mandatory impact assessments, looking at environmental and future consequences of policies, giving formal advisory roles to people representing, say, children's interests, elders' perspectives, or the environment itself.
Okay.
And then there's the really groundbreaking step, non-human representation, giving legal rights or political standing to nature itself, like New Zealand did with the Wanganui River.
Recognizing a river as a legal entity with rights.
Exactly. Treating it as a living being in the eyes of the law and potentially within democratic processes. It's a profound shift in thinking.
It really is, thinking of nature having a voice. Wow. Okay, we've touched on technology a few times, but let's really dig into its potential role here. How can tech help create this more inclusive democracy?
Tech is seen as a massive potential enabler, though obviously it comes with its own challenges too.
Okay.
We already talked about digital platforms for ongoing engagement, but AI-enhanced deliberation is another big area.
AI helping us talk to each other better.
Kind of, yeah. Imagine AI tools that can process huge amounts of citizen feedback, maybe help identify common ground even when debates seem really polarized, or make complex policy information easier for everyone to understand.
That could be really useful.
Taiwan's V-Taiwan platform is often cited as an early example, using tech to facilitate large-scale online discussion on policy issues.
Okay, so AI as a facilitator, a synthesizer.
Right, and it could go further. Think AI-assisted policy drafting. Citizens could work together online to draft proposals, and AI could offer feedback, check against existing laws, maybe surface relevant research.
So collaborative lawmaking with AI help.
Potentially. And the most popular or well-supported proposals could then go to elected officials for formal review. Some even talk about AI helping to analyze policies for hidden biases, promoting more equitable outcomes, AI-driven inclusive governance.
That's aiming high. What about voting itself?
Blockchain voting comes up a lot. The promise is super secure, transparent, verifiable elections. There are still hurdles, scalability, digital divide, but pilot projects are happening.
Right. Secure and transparent sounds good.
And then you get into the really speculative stuff, like neural consensus networks.
Neural, though.
Yeah, this is way out there. The idea is governance guided by AI trained on like real-time brain activity data from the population. Definitely science fiction territory for now.
Okay, yeah. Let's maybe put a pin in that one for now. From practical platforms to brainwave governance. It shows the sheer range of thinking, doesn't it?
It really does, from the immediately practical to the wildly imaginative.
All right, let's bring it back down to earth a bit. What about the local level? Community-based approaches.
This is super important. Democracy isn't just this abstract national thing. It has to live in our community.
Right, where we actually live.
So ideas like community-based decision-making things, like neighborhood parliaments or the decentralized planning they've done in Kerala, India, empowering people to shape things right where they are.
Makes sense. More local control.
Yeah. And even more granular, like hyper-local micro-councils. Imagine tiny councils, maybe just for a few blocks, with rotating leadership, feeding ideas upwards.
Street corner democracy.
Kind of. And then there's radical localism, sometimes called nested governance or bioregionalism. The idea is organizing governance around natural ecological boundaries, like a watershed, instead of just old political lines.
So aligning governance with the environment it operates in.
Exactly. Allowing for solutions that are really tailored to the specific place and its needs. It fosters that sense of connection and ownership.
Yeah, decisions bubbling up from the ground, not just dictated from above.
Yeah.
I like that. And the sources went even further, right? Beyond these kinds of political structures.
Oh, yeah. A really big theme is economic democracy. Taking democratic principles, participation, accountability, and applying them to the economy.
How so?
Things like worker cooperatives, where employees own and run the business. More participatory budgeting, but within companies or organizations. Community wealth building, trying to keep economic benefits local.
Got examples?
Sure. The evergreen cooperatives in Cleveland, the huge Mondragon network in Spain, the Preston model in the UK, all trying different ways to democratize economic activity.
Okay. Extending democracy beyond just the ballot box into where we work and how our local economies function.
Exactly. Then there are ideas like decentralized autonomous democracies, or DEDs. These are more theoretical, using things like blockchain, maybe, to create governance systems for groups who don't fit into traditional states, like displaced populations.
Wow. Governance without a state.
Potentially. And looking bigger, there's a growing call for global democratic forums, transnational assemblies, maybe reforms at the UN to tackle global problems like climate change or pandemics that no single nation can solve alone.
Right. Problems that cross borders need cross-border solutions.
Precisely. And just for fun, if humanity ever does make it off-world, people are already speculating about interplanetary democracy.
Okay, now you're really stretching things.
Yeah.
From neighborhood councils to governing Mars.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling, the scope.
It shows how far people are willing to push the definition of democracy.
So as we've journeyed through all these ideas, the practical, the radical, the sci-fi, what are some of the maybe missing pieces? Things we haven't quite covered?
That's a great question, because a lot of the really cutting-edge thinking recognizes that just changing structures isn't enough. You have to think about the how and the who in a deeper way.
Okay, like what?
Well, cognitive diversity and deliberation. It's not just about having people from different backgrounds, but actively valuing different ways of thinking when trying to solve problems.
So not just demographics, but thinking styles.
Exactly. And embodied democracy, the idea that participation shouldn't just be verbal or written. It could involve visual arts, community mapping, movement, engaging our whole selves, not just our rational mind.
Getting beyond just talking heads.
Right. And related to that is emotional and psychological inclusion. How do we build empathy into decision-making? How do we account for well-being? Some propose things like training in empathetic communication or even formal emotional impact assessments for new laws.
Assessing the emotional impact of legislation?
Yeah.
That's different.
It is. It's about recognizing humans are emotional beings, and maybe our governance should reflect that. Then we see the continued push for non-human representation. We talked about the Wanganui River example. The idea of a universal basic voice, basically, ensuring everyone has the basic resources, time, and support needed to actually participate. Because participation isn't free, right? It takes time and energy.
That's a really important point. Leveling the playing field for participation itself.
Absolutely. And then you get into some really creative, almost philosophical areas. Dreaming collectives platforms for people to collectively imagine desirable futures.
Wow.
Using VR simulations for crowdsourced moral dilemmas, letting people experience the potential impact of a policy choice before voting on it.
Trying policies out in VR first.
Maybe. Gamified democracy, using game mechanics like earning points for civic actions to boost engagement. Though you have to be careful that doesn't trivialize things.
Yeah, keeping it meaningful.
Sensory democracy, using augmented reality to experience data or policy impacts in new ways. Cultural humility, really learning from and integrating consensus-based practices from diverse cultures, not just assuming the Western model is the only way.
Right, learning from other traditions.
Thinking of democracy as embodied participation, almost like a ritual that builds community. And then the super speculative stuff like quantum democracy. Probably best not to dive too deep there.
Okay, yeah. Quantum democracy might be a topic for another day.
Yeah.
But it really feels like we've gone from concrete reforms to some truly mind-bending possibilities.
Yeah.
Looking across this whole landscape, what are the big overarching themes tying it all together?
I think if you step back, the biggest theme is this shift. A shift away from seeing democracy as this fixed, finished thing, like a set of rules you just follow, and towards understanding it as an ongoing practice, something that needs to constantly evolve, adapt, and learn.
Democracy is a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. There's a clear thread about needing to consciously address power imbalances, who has it, who doesn't, and why. A big focus on rebuilding trust, which feels pretty essential right now.
Definitely.
And this really important dimension of time, thinking long-term, thinking about future generations, thinking about the planet's timescale, and finally, just the sheer importance of experimentation, being willing to try new things, see what works, learn, and adjust.
It's not about finding the one perfect system, but about continuous improvement.
Precisely. It's an ongoing project.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap our heads around some key takeaways, we've talked about moving beyond just voting, right? With things like citizens' assemblies, maybe even liquid democracy.
More active roles.
Empowering communities directly, like with participatory budgeting, putting money decisions closer to the people.
Yeah, making it tangible.
And really grappling with time, thinking about the future generations, the environment itself in our decision-making.
Crucial shifts in perspective.
It definitely feels like a move away from that passive, check-the-box idea of citizenship towards something much more alive, active, and engaged.
I think that's a great way to put it. And for you listening, the hope is that these ideas show how getting the knowledge you need, how participating doesn't have to feel overwhelming. These are proposals for more structured, maybe more meaningful ways for everyone to have a real voice.
Right. So as we finish up this deep dive, maybe some food for thought for everyone listening, which of these ideas really sparked something for you? Which one felt like it held the most possibility? And maybe what's one small step, even just in your own community, your workplace, your sphere of influence, that could nudge things towards a more vibrant, more inclusive democracy?
Yeah.
Because if we really believe every voice matters, what fundamental shifts in how we think about participation are needed?
Big questions.
They are. And really, this exploration is just scratching the surface. There are so many avenues to explore further, depending on what caught your interest today. Hopefully, it's given you plenty to think about.